are making the infamous Cheesy Biscuits, now renamed as the Sturdy Cheesy Biscuits. So the recipe in your keto soup bowl is the original recipe or the old recipe, and I highly recommend that you don't follow that one, that you actually go up to carriebrown.com and just do a search for Cheesy Biscuits and follow the recipe there. I tweaked it to make them sturdier so that they could be used better for slicing and using as a bun for something else. So, and this version, they taste exactly the same, but they're just far sturdier. And another benefit of the new recipe is that they are now self-limiting. It's much harder to eat like the entire batch than it was, 1 or 2, and I'm totally full. So you may draw on this page or maybe write the updates from the website on this page, but I wouldn't recommend that you use that recipe. So let's get that out of the way. Okay, now these biscuits are super simple. Also one of the most popular recipes I've ever done. If I had $1 for every time someone said to me, these are the best keto bread replacement ever, then I'd be rich. But I didn't have $1 for every time they said that. Anyway, so heat your oven to 375. My oven's ready to go over there. Now, in my food processor, I have the almond flour. If you want, do I have one? I do. If you do not have a food processor or you just like the process, you can use one of these. This is called a pastry blender, and you simply put everything in your bowl here and you just kind of mash it down, and it does what the food processor does. It just takes more work. But you can totally use a pastry blender if this isn't a thing for you, or you don't want to get it dirty, or you just feel like not using any electricity. So I've got my almond flour in here, and I'm gonna add, I've got the salt, I've got the baking powder, I've got the eye of newt or konjac flour, I've got powdered gelatin. And what I like to do at this point, we do need to add the butter, but I like to just give the dry ingredients a whiz in the food processor, or if you're doing it by hand, mix it up well. Before we add the butter in. Also, almond flour should be kept in the freezer. So if you're weighing your almond flour out the freezer, it's still gonna be lumpy. You don't have to wait. The other reason why I like to blitz this for a few seconds is just to make sure that all those lumps of frozen almond flour are completely gone. So I just pulse the dry ingredients together just to make sure they're mixed. Then I have my butter, which is cold, and I'm going to cut it into little cubes, which I'm going to put in my almond flour. The colder the butter is, the better. Because the fact that the butter isn't melty will mean that you will have more success in your biscuits rising. And the science for that, my butter is actually, it's been out for a minute, so it is not as cold as it could be. I highly recommend that if you prep in advance like I did, that you leave your butter in the fridge like I didn't. So the science is that the butter, the lumps of butter that do not melt into the dry ingredients, those lumps of butter actually create little pockets that, so when the baking powder creates the air that makes it rise, the butter creates little pockets of air which also rise. So that's why cold butter is an important thing. Now I'm all sticky. So the colder the butter, the better. If you prep, put the butter back in the fridge until you're ready to use it. So, lid on. And pulse it. If you blend it, you're going to end up making a very homogeneous dough with all that butter, and that's not what you want. So pulse it. About 20 pulses. Have a look at it. It should, you want it to resemble fine breadcrumbs. I can still see big lumps of butter there, so a few more. But it really doesn't take very much. Maybe 30 pulses is all you need. So then what we're going to do, and I'll warn you now, we're going to do my favourite thing, which is use our hands. You're going to tip, mind the blade, it's very sharp. You're going to tip your butter and flour mixture into a bowl. You are going to add the cheese, and really your hands are the best thing here, so I recommend using your hands. However, I'm going to get the egg ready first, so you're going to crack an egg into a little bowl, and you're going to give that a little whisk. And then you're going to add your milk, whisk them together. Until that's ready. Okay, so I'm in here now. I've got my almond flour mix, I've got my cheese, and I'm just going to toss that around until the cheese is evenly distributed throughout the almond flour mixture. I'm going to make a rough hole in the middle. Our egg is going to go in. And I know some of you are going to be freaked out by this. You can use a spatula if you want, but I just find it a lot easier and a lot more fulfilling to do it by hand. So you're going to mix that together. It doesn't take much. And form it into a dough. And if you've never made food with your hands before, I highly recommend it. I find it way more fun. It's also how I was taught, but okay, so now we've got our dough. And we're not going to go crazy with the molding. We don't want to melt that butter any more than we have to. And our hands being warm will help the butter melt. So it doesn't have to be perfect. If you want at this point, if yours is sticky. So a note on that, almond flours are different. This was Kirkland brand. The other brand I use is Honeywell. I will put links below for you so you can find them easily. Other brands, if they're not as fine or if they're just different, they may absorb more or less liquid. So if you're struggling, if your dough doesn't end up looking like that, then you may have to make a note that when you're using certain brand of almond flour, that you use more or less milk. Also, egg sizes vary. Recipes are always written using medium eggs, but if you have larger or smaller eggs, particularly if you're a backyard chicken lover, then your egg may increase or reduce the amount of milk you need. So that's just a note on that, so you haven't done anything wrong. So there we go, there's our dough. We're going to get our rolling pin and we're just gonna, and also if you're used to making biscuits or pastries, this is typically a little bit stickier than the flour based recipes, simply because almond flour does not soak up liquid like wheat flour does. So that's what's going on there. Now you can roll these as thin as you like, and you can also use whatever size cutter you like, depending on the people that you're feeding. I have a giant in the house, so I'm going to make bigger biscuits. So mine are bigger, thicker biscuits. I recommend for this you just use a palette knife. This is a palette knife. You can also get big ones which look like that, and just slide it underneath. What you're touching it less, so you're less likely to spoil the shape, but also easier to get up. And the less you touch, the less you're going to melt that butter. Just going to move that up there, and then slide your palette knife underneath. Take off the little trim there. Now, metal cutters. If you do not have metal cutters, I would recommend that you use a sharp knife. And the reason for that is if you don't cut a clean edge, I'm probably only going to get 6 out of these because I've used a big cutter and I'm making them thick. If you metal cutters are sharp like a knife, okay? So they literally, they cut through the dough. If you use a plastic cutter or a glass, what happens is when you push it through, it literally pushes the dough down, so it kind of seals the dough in on itself. And that's one of the reasons why you may have struggled with biscuits not rising. So with biscuits, you really need to use something sharp and metal. So if metal cutters are not a thing that you have, I'm a bit of a metal cutter hoarder, to be honest. I have a lot of different shapes and sizes, but if you do make a lot of scones or biscuits, I recommend getting some. They're not expensive, because you don't want to seal the sides of your biscuit. So there's my I've got 6 big biscuits instead of 10 smaller biscuits or 8 smaller biscuits. And of course there always has to be a runt biscuit at the end, so that you can test them to make sure they're good enough. This one of course is not going to rise as much because I haven't cut the edges, but there we go. So there's our biscuits. Now what I'm going to do, and I actually gave my pastry brush a different job, so I now can't use it for this. I need to get another one. I highly recommend you get a pastry brush. If you don't know what that is, this is a pastry brush, but I reassigned my pastry brush to being the brush that brushes the coffee grounds out of the coffee grinder every morning. So I can't use that. I need to get a new one. So what I'm going to do is, since my hands are already dirty, I'm going to use my fingers. So you just want to, this is called egg wash. You just want to egg wash the tops of your biscuits, and this will help make them look browner and more beautiful. You can totally leave, if you don't want to do this, you can totally leave the egg wash off. The tops of the biscuits will be drier looking and they won't be as nice a colour. But this is really just an aesthetic, so you can totally skip the egg wash if you want to. Or if this seems like too much work, or you don't have a pastry brush and you don't want to use your hands. So there we go, egg wash is on, and there are your sturdy cheesy biscuits. On your tray, I always use parchment because I'm lazy and I don't want to spend my life cleaning pans. So parchment underneath. Parchment and wax paper are completely different. Don't use wax paper because it has wax in and will actually melt in the oven. So make sure you have parchment paper. If you're outside the US, you may call it grease-proof paper. Same thing. So here they are, they're off to the oven, and those are your cheesy biscuits.